Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Blood sprayed across the pristine white marble floor, a stark, violent contrast to the sterile silence of the high court. Touch him again, and I will sever your hand from your wrist before your heart beats its next rhythm. The threat didn't come as a shout, but as a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floorboards, causing the executioner to freeze, his blade hovering inches above the prisoner's exposed, bruised neck. The doors to the heavily guarded chamber had been blown off their hinges, smoke curling around the silhouette of a man who looked less like a soldier and more like a god of war descended to wreak havoc. General Cassian Valerius, the obsidian sword of the Empire, stepped through the haze. His military trench coat billowed around him like a shroud of darkness, and his eyes, usually a cold, calculated gray, were bleeding into a feral crimson. The entire court gasped. No one interrupted an execution ordered by the council. Certainly not the council's most loyal dog. But Cassian wasn't looking at the terrified judges or the trembling guards. His gaze was locked on the figure chained to the center block. Julian, the disgraced diplomat, the traitor, the man Cassian had spent 5 years hating, 5 years trying to forget, and 5 years dreaming about in the darkest hours of the night. Julian looked up, his face gaunt, his lips split, sweat matting his silver hair to his forehead. He wheezed, a pathetic sound that tore something open in Cassian's chest. Cassian, Julian whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer or a curse. I told you, Cassian said, his voice calm but terrifyingly heavy with pheromones that forced the beta guards to their knees, choking on the sheer density of his dominance. He walked forward, the sound of his boots echoing like gunshots. I told you that if you ever let yourself get caught, I would be the one to kill you. He stopped directly in front of the executioner, who was now shaking so violently the blade rattled. Cassian didn't even draw his weapon. He simply reached out, grabbed the steel blade with a gloved hand, and snapped it in half. But I lied, Cassian murmured, his gaze dropping to the trembling man in chains. The narrative of the Empire was simple. Alphas ruled, betas served, and omegas were breeding stock, hidden away in gilded cages. For years, Julian had walked the halls of power as a beta, a brilliant strategist who outmaneuvered generals and politicians alike. He had been Cassian's academic rival, his political foil, the thorn in his side that kept him sharp. They had danced around each other for a decade, a waltz of insults and intellectual spars. Then Julian had been accused of selling state secrets. He had vanished, only to be dragged back 3 days ago, broken and destined for the blade. Cassian knelt, ignoring the shouts of the High Inquisitor demanding order. He reached out, his large hand cupping Julian's jaw. The contact sent a shockwave through them both, a static charge that tasted like ozone and iron. Why didn't you tell me? Cassian asked, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for them. Julian flinched, turning his face away. Go away, Valerius. You'll be branded a traitor too. I asked you a question. Cassian's thumb brushed over the pulse point on Julian's neck. And then he froze. Underneath the smell of stale blood, prison grime, and fear, there was something else. A sense so faint it had been buried under suppressants for years, but now, with Julian's body failing and his defenses shattered, it was leaking out. Lilacs, rainwater, and the sweet, maddening honey of a distress signal. Cassian's pupils dilated, swallowing the gray. The realization hit him with the force of an orbital strike. Julian wasn't a beta. You're an omega, Cassian breathed, the realization shattering his entire worldview. The silence that followed was deafening. In this empire, an unmated omega in a position of power wasn't just illegal, it was a capital offense. Julian hadn't just been hiding a gender. He had been defying the laws of nature and the state every single day of his life. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, tears leaking out. Now you know? Disgusting, isn't it? The great strategist, nothing but a. He didn't finish. Cassian had ripped the heavy iron collar from Julian's neck with a display of strength that defied physics, the metal screeching as it twisted and snapped. General Valerius. The High Inquisitor screamed, standing up. That prisoner is state property. If you remove him, you are declaring war on the council. Cassian stood up, pulling Julian with him. He wrapped an arm around Julian's waist, pulling the smaller man flush against his hard chest. He turned to the council, his expression devoid of humanity. Then prepare for war, Cashin stated. Because this man is not state property. He released a wave of alpha pheromones so potent that the stained glass windows of the courtroom shattered outward, raining colored shards onto the streets below. He is mine. The escape was a blur of violence. Cashin moved with the efficiency of a machine, his handgun barking controlled bursts that incapacitated guards without killing them. He was still a soldier, even if he was going rogue. But when a guard aimed a stun baton at Julian's injured leg, Cashin didn't hesitate. He broke the man's arm with a sickening crunch, kicking him aside like refuse. They commandeered a heavy-armored transport skiff, blasting out of the citadel and into the smog-choked lower districts. Cashin engaged the autopilot, setting coordinates for a safe house in the dead zone, a lawless sector where the Empire's surveillance grid couldn't reach. Only when the city lights faded into the distance did the adrenaline begin to wane, replaced by the crushing reality of their situation. The interior of the skiff was dim, lit only by the red glow of the instrument panel. Julian was slumped in the passenger seat, clutching his side. His breathing was ragged, shallow gasps that rattled in his chest. Cashin engaged the stealth cloak and immediately turned, unbuckling his seatbelt. He moved to Julian, his movements urgent but surprisingly gentle. "Let me see," Cashin ordered, his voice rough. "I'm fine," Julian rasped, trying to push Cashin away. "Just drive. You are bleeding out on my upholstery, Julian." "Let me see." Cashin pushed Julian's hands away and tore open the ragged remains of the prisoner's shirt. The sight made Cashin's blood run cold. The skin of Julian's torso was a canvas of abuse, purple bruises, lacerations, and old scars. But it was the fresh, angry burn from an electric whip across his ribs that made Cashin's vision swim with red. "They tortured you," Cashin said, the words tasting like ash. "For 3 days. They wanted the names of the rebellion leaders," Julian whispered, his head lolling back against the seat. "I didn't give them anything. I should have killed them all," Cashin growled, reaching for the medkit mounted on the wall. He pulled out a Regangel canister and a pain inhibitor. "Why didn't you call for me? Even as a rival. You know I have never tolerated torture." Julian let out a bitter, broken laugh. "Call you? You were on the northern frontier. And even if you were here, why would the Empire's sword save a traitor? I am here now," Cashin said, applying the gel. Julian hissed, his body arching off the seat, his fingers digging into Cashin's forearm. "It hurts," Julian whimpered, the Omega in him rising to the surface, stripping away the stoic mask he had worn for years. "I know. I've got you." Cashin injected the pain inhibitor into Julian's shoulder. As the drug took effect, Julian's tension melted. He slumped forward, his forehead resting against Cashin's chest. Cashin froze, his hands hovering over Julian's back. The scent was stronger now. The stress and the injury had triggered a biological reaction. Julian was slipping into a stress-induced heat. The smell of lilacs turned heavy, sultry, and overwhelming. It clawed at Cashin's instincts, demanding he claim, bite, not. Every biological imperative screamed at him to take what was in front of him. But Cashin Valerius was not a beast. He was a man of iron will. He gritted his teeth, his jaw aching with the effort to suppress his own rut response. He wrapped his coat tighter around Julian. "You're going into heat," Cashin said, his voice strained. I don't have my suppressants," Julian mumbled, his speech slurring. He looked up, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Cashin, it burns. I know. Help me." It was a plea that could have meant 1,000 things. "Help me escape. Help me die. Help me through the heat." Cashin brushed a strand of sweat-soaked silver hair from Julian's eyes. "I can't help you the way you want, Julian. Not while you're injured. Not while you're vulnerable. You hate me," Julian whispered, a tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. "Because I lied." "I don't hate you," Cashin corrected, his thumb wiping the tear away. "I hate that you thought you had to lie to be safe. I hate that I was part of the system that made you afraid." Cashin shifted, lifting Julian effortlessly into his lap. The skiff was cramped, but he needed to keep Julian's body temperature regulated. He adjusted the seat to recline, settling Julian against him. "Rest," Cashin commanded, using the alpha voice, not to dominate, but to soothe. A low, vibrating purr in his chest. Julian's eyes fluttered shut, his body instinctively seeking the warmth and protection of the alpha. "Why did you come?" he murmured, barely audible. "You risk everything." Cashin looked out the viewport at the endless dark of the wasteland. He thought about his rank, his medals, his family name. He thought about the lifetime of duty he had just incinerated in a single moment of rebellion. "Because," Cashin whispered into Julian's hair, "when I heard you were going to die, the world stopped making sense. A world without you isn't an empire worth serving." They arrived at the safe house, a decommissioned bunker buried beneath a ruin of the old world, just as the storm broke. Acid rain lashed against the concrete, masking their heat signature. Cashin carried Julian inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The bunker was cold, smelling of dust and oil, but it was safe. He laid Julian on the solitary cot in the corner and immediately went to secure the perimeter. He spent the next hour rigging sensors and checking the ventilation. He was distracting himself. The scent in the room was becoming suffocating. Julian's heat was fully blooming, a sweet, cloying fog that made Cashin's hands shake. He needed to leave the room. He needed to go to the outer chamber and lock the door. If he stayed, he would lose control. He turned to leave. "Don't go." The voice was weak but clear. Cashin stopped, his hand on the heavy iron door handle. He didn't turn around. "I have to, Julian. You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." Cashin turned slowly. Julian had pushed himself up on his elbows. The shirt was gone, bandages wrapping his torso. His skin was flushed a deep, feverish pink. His eyes were no longer the sharp, intellectual blue of the diplomat Julian. They were dark, hazy pools of need. "I'm an Omega, Cashin. I've spent 30 years denying it, fighting it, taking pills that made me sick, just so I could have a voice at the table." Julian's breath hitched. "I don't want to fight it tonight. And I don't want anyone else." Cashin walked back to the bed, drawn by a gravity he couldn't resist. He stood over Julian, a towering shadow. "This is the heat talking. The trauma. Is it?" Julian challenged, a spark of his old fire returning. "You think I didn't see the way you looked at me in the academy? You think I didn't feel the tension in the war room? We were never just rivals, Cashin. We were two magnets forced apart by the law." Julian reached out, his trembling hand grasping Cashin's belt. "The Empire wants me dead. If this is my last night, I want to spend it as myself. With you." Cashin's resolve shattered. He dropped to his knees, burying his face in the crook of Julian's neck. He inhaled deeply, the scent of lilacs filling his lungs, soothing the savage beast inside him while simultaneously waking it up. "If I touch you," Cashin growled against Julian's skin, "I will not stop. I will bind you to me. You will never be free of me, Julian. Not in this life, not in the next." Julian arched his neck, bearing the gland that had been hidden by high collars for decades. "I never wanted to be free of you. I only wanted to be your equal." "You are not my equal," Cashin murmured, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin over the gland. "You are my superior." You brought the obsidian sword to his knees without lifting a weapon. Cashin kissed him then, a desperate, devouring thing. It wasn't soft. It was a collision of years of repressed longing, a war of tongues and teeth. Julian tasted like blood and sweetness. He moaned into Cashin's mouth, his legs wrapping around the alpha's waist, pulling him closer, demanding the friction. The night was a blur of fever and skin. Cashin worshipped every inch of Julian's battered body, treating the bruises with reverence, replacing the memory of pain with pleasure. He was rough where Julian needed him to be, grounding him, but gentle with the wounds. When the climax came, it was cataclysmic. And in the aftermath, as the storm raged outside, Cashin did the one thing forbidden to a soldier of his rank involving a traitor. He bit down. He sank his teeth into the gland on Julian's neck, breaking the skin, pouring his pheromones into the Omega's bloodstream. The bond snapped into place, a metaphysical chain linking their souls. Julian screamed, not in pain, but in the overwhelming ecstasy of completion. The hollowness that had plagued them both for years was suddenly filled. Morning brought a cold, gray light filtering through the ventilation slats. Cashin was awake, sitting on the edge of the cot, cleaning his sidearm. He was shirtless, his back a map of scratches from Julian's desperation the night before. Julian stirred, groaning as consciousness returned. He reached out, his hand finding the warmth of Cashin's skin. The memories of the night flooded back, and with them, the terrifying reality of the bite. "You marked me," Julian whispered, his fingers tracing the fresh, healing puncture wounds on his neck. "I did," Cashin said, not looking up from the gun. "Regrets?" Julian paused, feeling the new presence in his mind, a warm, steady hum of Cashin's emotions. Protective, possessive, adoring. "No. But you realize what this means? The Council won't just kill me now. They'll hunt you to the ends of the galaxy." Cashin reassembled the weapon with a sharp click and holstered it. He turned to look at Julian. The feral madness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a steely, unshakable resolve. "Let them come," Cashin said. He leaned down, kissing Julian's forehead. "I have the coordinates of the rebel fleet. We leave in 10 minutes. You're joining the rebellion?" Julian asked, shocked. "You hate the rebellion. You called them chaotic anarchists." "I hate chaos," Cashin corrected. "But I love you. And if the Empire has no place for us." He stood up and offered his hand to the man who had been his enemy, his rival, and was now his soul. "Then we will burn the Empire down and build a new one." Julian took his hand. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the future. He wasn't a beta hiding in the shadows, nor a prisoner waiting for death. He was the mate of the most dangerous man in the universe. And that is how the Empire's greatest weapon became a shield for the one man who could destroy him. If you felt the heat of Cashin's possessiveness, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you give up supreme power for a love that could get you killed? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, Man 1. General Cashin, tall muscular build, short black hair with undercut, wearing torn futuristic military trench coat, fierce protective expression, glowing red eyes, holding Man 2 close. Man 2. Julian, slender build, silver hair messy, wearing tattered prisoner rags, bandages on chest, looking up at Man 1 with teary eyes and flushed face. Visible, bite mark on neck. Background is dark, gritty sci-fi bunker, dramatic blue and red emergency lighting, rain streaking on concrete walls, intense emotional atmosphere, cinematic composition, sharp focus, intricate details.